All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to I believe this is our fifth community conversation hosted by Family and Children First Council of Franklin County, and we're so glad to have everyone here today. I will just introduce a few folks so that others know who is on the call, and we will get started with our topic today, which is how stress impacts our behavior. So joining me in conversation and in hosting today, a few of my colleagues. I should also probably introduce myself. I'm Jesse Schrader. I'm one of the deputy directors at Franklin County Family and Children First Council in the Building Better Lives initiative, which is our trauma-informed care and kind of brain-based approach to supporting agencies and families in our area dealing with trauma and adversity. And one of my partners in crime is Debbie Holy Cross. She's with me here today. Do you want to say hi, Debbie?
Good morning. I'm not going to repeat what Jesse said. I do the same thing. So, hi there.
All right. Glad you're here. And the third wheel of our team is Eve Fitch, who is actually in our REACT team, which is involved with the opioid response. And so Eve is part of that REACT opioid response team working with families who are recovering from an overdose. So Eve, are you with us here today? I know I saw you.
Morning.
Hi, good morning. Good to see you as always.
Oh.
And I believe that if she's not already with us, our director, Jane Wide, will be joining us as well, and we'll probably be jumping in, kind of scrolling through to see. I don't know if I see her on all of the faces here just yet, but Jane will be with us today as well. Great. So just want to also remind folks and let them know that we will be sharing some of the documents and some of the files that we have today through the chat box. And, this is meant to be a community conversation. So we would love to have your input and your participation in this. You are welcome to participate in the chat box area by offering comments or questions or ideas. Debbie will be sort of monitoring that and keeping an eye on it, and she will read out some things or invite folks to comment. And you're also welcome, if we're sort of raising questions, to unmute your microphone and to chime in and to offer sort of your perspective on things. We recognize that these topics that we're going to talk about, there's both a universal, everyone is dealing with this component, and also a specific, what does this look like in your setting and in your situation? So we are eager to hear how you are experiencing and dealing with some of these challenges. So feel free to chime in. But if you can, please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking so that the audio quality is good. So our topic today is about how stress impacts our behavior, and kind of sort of addressing that question that I think a lot of us have felt and experienced probably more than once in the last week, or even a couple of times a day, where we kind of catch ourselves saying, like, why am I even acting like this? What is going on here? Why am I behaving this way? And recognizing that a big part of that is because of the impact of stress. So before we jump into this topic, though, I am just a little bit curious if folks have participated in a community conversation with us before or not. I appreciate everyone who used the SurveyMonkey link to register. That helps us kind of know how many folks to expect. And there's also a place in there where you can suggest topics. We've been reading and reviewing those. But I'm just curious how many folks have been part of these conversations with us previously. Give folks just a little bit more time to respond to that. As we jump into this topic of how stress impacts our behavior, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit about the brain and about how the brain responds. So looks like we've got a few new folks here today, which is great, and a few folks who are returning. Debbie's going to go ahead and put in the chat box here the couple of files that I'm going to share with you. So you can see here that we have the message that we provided that we sent out last week that shares this information for service providers. And we also, I just want to make sure that people know that we also have one that is for parents as well. And so we have two versions every time we write this, and this is meant to be shared with your staff or your colleagues, or also any caregivers or parents or families that you're working with. And so Debbie will put those files in the chat box there, as well as a copy of the slides that we're going to work on today, so you have all of those resources. So with all of that kind of technical stuff out of the way, if you have any questions about that, you can put that in the chat area. Let me just share a little bit and just say a few things about when we're talking about responding to stress, what that means, and kind of what we're talking about. And this is explained a bit in that community message that we sent out. But we really think about and recognize that the brain is built and functions in a sequential, bottom-up approach. If you've been part of any of our trainings before, I'm sure you've heard us talk about this, but we recognize that the brain at its lowest level, at the brain stem, is really focused on keeping us alive and survival. Things like keeping your heart rate going, keeping your breathing functioning, your metabolism. It's automatic functions that you don't have to think about that are meant to keep you safe. And then as you move up in that structure in the brain, you start to deal with more midbrain or limbic areas that really are more about relationships and emotions and interactions with other people. How am I feeling about a situation? And it's not until we get up to the top of the brain that we hit that cortex, complex thinking, rational thinking, reason, and those more kind of complicated areas that we tend to think about what our brain does. And when we use words like thinking, that's kind of what we're meaning. But it's really not all that our brain does is language and thinking and reason. Our brain is doing a lot of things at those lower levels to keep us alive, to keep us safe, and to monitor all of those feelings and relationships. So this kind of sequential development and sort of stacking of those brain systems is something that we refer to a lot. And it's really important when we start talking about how stress impacts the brain, because what happens is that the more stress we feel, the lower down into our brain we start to behave. And instead of having that rational, abstract thinking, reasoning part of our cortex, or the top part of our brain, we tend to get a little bit more emotional and reactive. Eve, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that. I know you have shared this information a lot before as well. I know that was kind of the, when we do this in training, we tend to talk about it for 30 or 40 minutes, and that was about 3 or 4 minutes of reviewing that. So what did I miss when we think about those sections of the brain? Oops, let me get you unmuted there.
Oops, I forgot. There's mowing going outside my window, so if you hear loud noises, that's what's happening. I don't know that you missed too much. I think, you know, when we think about that sequential architecture of the brain, it's, you know, really important to recognize that all of our information comes up from the bottom and goes through and to the cortex. And so we can get waylaid at any point, depending upon whether or not our brain feels like we're safe, if it's known, and if it's predictable. So I think that's important to remember as well.
Definitely. Thanks for that reminder. So Exactly like you were saying, and that's kind of why this arrow sort of goes from the bottom to the top, that information is coming in to the brain through that way. So today we just kind of wanted to focus on how we respond to stress. And there's this phrase that Dr. Perry from the neurosequential network and in the neurosequential model that he has coined called state dependent functioning. Kind of sounds like some fancy language, but when you sort of break it down, it makes sense that how we function or how we behave is dependent upon what state we are in. And we're not talking about states of the country, although right now that's kind of the case as well. You know, if you're in a state that's opening up, like some states are, you might be functioning a little bit differently. But we're talking about what states of stress. And this is a bit of a simplified version of what Dr. Perry teaches. But we think about in the calm state, we have all of this ability to do abstract thinking. We have all of our brain available to us. We have that full cortex, and in a calm state, which is sort of like right when you wake up in the morning or just before you fall asleep, or if you're sitting outside and enjoying the beautiful Ohio spring weather, which we keep getting glimpses of, but then days like today, it reverts back to cold and feels like winter again this morning. But when you're in that calm state, you kind of notice, oh, I'm thinking about the future. I'm thinking about, what would my dreams be? How would I want to make this really come to life? And we have that full abstract thinking. But then when we start to feel a little bit of stress, we move into that alarm state and we get a little bit more emotional. And that's when that stress, or another word for that might be a threat, when we feel like there's some danger coming at us, I start to be a little more emotional. I start to feel like, okay, well, I don't feel safe right now. And why would you say that to me? And we get a little bit more reactive in the way that we behave. And if that threat and that stress increases, we move into that fear state. And now we're really reactive in our thinking, and we tend to snap really quickly because it's really all about self-preservation in that moment. So again, that's kind of a quick and dirty of the state-dependent functioning, something that if you participate in some of our trauma-informed care trainings, we actually take quite a bit of time to explain and go through in detail. But I just wanted to give a little bit of a baseline for folks so that when when we're talking about calm or alarm or fear state, that we're moving into those lower parts of the brain that are more focused on emotions, or even self-preservation and keeping us alive. So I'll just pause again for a second there to see if any folks have questions or need any clarification. And Eve or Debbie, you can kind of jump in to see if there was something that I was missing. Thank you, Debbie, for posting those files in the chat there. And those give a little bit more description of those things. If we have that kind of base language of calm state, alarm state, fear state, and then that emotional reactive thinking, we'll start to talk through a little bit, what do some of those behaviors look like when I'm feeling more of that stress that we're all going through. Any folks have any questions or comments or need any clarification about some of those ideas? Well, great. That either means that I explained it perfectly well, or that everyone's just taking a morning nap. So either way, that's okay. So I think one thing that's really important to think about when we kind of sum this up is that our behavior and our thinking is different because of the impact of stress. That's really the core concept that comes through when we're thinking about state-dependent functioning. How we are thinking, how we are behaving is different when we are under stress. And in this current situation, so that concept is true all the time, universally for all people. It's true for babies, it's true for our children, it's true for ourselves, it's true for our parents. Anyone who is using their brain to function is going to behave differently when they are feeling that impact of stress. The thing that's going on with us now, though, is that the timing and the intensity of that stress is really going to have an impact on our ability to sort of rebound to that calm state. Typically, every day we go through sort of a pattern of I'm in a calm state, but now I'm feeling a little bit of stress, and so I go into an alarm state. I might be realizing that I forgot something, or somebody says something that makes me feel a certain kind of way, and so I'm more emotional. But then I have a chance to rebound and to recover and go back into that calm state. But when we are in a situation that is a prolonged stress and it's not going away, we're entering into the end of this kind of second month and coming into a third month of this stay-at-home coronavirus COVID-19 situation. So the timing is prolonged, it's ongoing. We don't have a chance to return to normal or return to a calm state. And when that intensity is so high, the stress is just continual and is really severe, it is harder for us to return to that calm state. And this is, again, something that's true for everybody. And when we think about some of the individuals we have the privilege to work with, or we think about our own experiences, when we've had those experiences that are high stress for a long period of time, that's when it has the biggest impact on our functioning. And so that's where we're going to start to see those changes in our behavior due to that stress. So I'll pause for a second again there, because those were a couple of key concepts I threw in. Eve, always love to hear your thoughts on that, if there was something that I missed there. And I think there's a question there too that we can respond to.
So the one thing that I think is important to remember, that when we kind of move from one state to the other, that we also kind of regress developmentally, and that's adults as well as, and in particular, children. So they might regress to a developmental stage. They might be acting like a 2-year-old when they're indeed 10. And it's important to respond to the developmental stage that's being presented, not their chronological age.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, Eve, for sure. Roger asked, do we have evidence if the state of thinking is persistent? And so I might need a little bit of clarification about your question, Roger. So I'll give an answer. If I miss what you're asking, clarify for me. That state of thinking is actually not persistent, in terms of we don't stay in that one state all of the time. We actually, kind of move through that calm or alarm or fear state, depending on how much sort of stress is coming at us. We're always going to be trying to find a more regulated or a more safe space. So if I'm in that fear state and I'm feeling a lot of threat and a lot of stress coming at me, I'm going to use whatever skills and abilities I have to protect myself. And that will be the things that we're kind of familiar with, of the fight, flight, or freeze responses. So I might try to get away from whatever that threat is, or I might turn off the TV because I just can't handle any more bad news. And then I'm going to find myself trying to find whatever that calm space is. And that's what some of the behaviors look like that we're going to talk about here. So we actually cycle through all of these throughout the day. Now, we might be more in an alarm state or an alert state if we have more stress coming at us more regularly. So kind of think about it like a baseline a little bit. It sort of pushes us a little bit more, that we're just a little bit more heightened all of the time, but we don't necessarily stay in that state persistently. Hopefully that answered that question pretty well. I appreciate folks putting questions in the chat box there. That's really helpful.
So Jesse, the other thing about that, we don't stay in one state, and I think right now, that's even more common. And it's to remember that when we move to those states that are kind of enacting some of the fear and that alarm state, our heart rate changes, the chemistry in our body changes, and we have chemical kind of things that are dumping. I think you all can resonate and kind of remember the feeling that you get when all of a sudden you are frightened, your belly kind of flips over. It's all of those chemicals that are happening. That's very tiring when we're moving in and out of all of that. And so I know that that's a really common question right now is, why do I always feel so tired? And I think you have to remember, as you move in and out of those responses, your body is changing, your heart rate's changing, your chemicals are changing, and it's really exhausting.
That is exactly right. And you kind of led right into our first example of how we are going to notice these changes in behavior. And one of the very first ones that is so common, and I'll just talk about this a little bit more, really pretty much the same thing that Eve said. And then I would love to hear from folks who can kind of just, resonate or connect with and say, yeah, I'm feeling this, one of the most common ways that we're seeing this is exhaustion, because just like Eve said, when we are feeling that threat, all of those internal hormones kick in and our body gets ready to respond to the threat. What's really interesting is that our brain doesn't know if the threat is a real physical threat that's coming at us, or if it's just a perceived kind of abstract threat. Our body is going to respond in the same way. So whether it's, a tree falling in the woods and I need to dodge to get away from it, and I need to, feel strong and have that burst of energy to be able to dodge and avoid it, or it's something really abstract like an illness that's out there in the world, my body kicks in with that same response of higher heart rate, increased blood pressure, more cortisol, more adrenaline. And that just makes you feel tired, especially if, like we said, it's ongoing and it's been going on for weeks, and if it's a big threat. So that exhaustion is a real thing. And I would love to hear if folks are kind of connecting with that, if they're sort of feeling like, man, I just, at least for me, I get to 8 or 8:30 at night and I just feel wiped, and it's kind of strange because, I'm not going anywhere. I don't necessarily feel as though I'm, doing more, but I just feel more tired than usual. So with each of these, changes in behavior, we're also going to try to give a couple of suggestions. And again, these are just some ideas and some suggestions that work for a few folks. You might have other suggestions, and those are the things we'd love to hear from you. So suggestions about exhaustion could be to try to be realistic about those expectations, and you just know, hey, I'm going to be tired. I know this is going to be the case. And I used to be able to hit this mark for my workload. I used to be able to hit this mark for my things that I was going to do. I need to reduce those expectations a little bit, if that's possible in your setting and where you're at in life. Leaning on supports from other people, that one's hard for me. I tend to be more independent and want to do it myself, but knowing that we need to get support and help from others around us, and planning for more sleep. One person mentioned there in the chat box there, needing to take that nap every day, but also knowing that the sunshine really helps. Any folks out there really kind of noticing this exhaustion being a factor for you, and when and how are you seeing that, and what are you doing to maybe respond?
Jesse.
Hey, good morning, Jane.
Good morning. Can you talk a little bit about, in the different states, the perception of time? So one of the things that happens with me when I hit that state of exhaustion, because I'm in a more escalated stress state, I feel like I can only think about right now. I can't think about the fact that tomorrow I'll feel better. Because when you're in a state of fear, you concentrate, your ability to understand, concentrate, react is very time limited. Do you know what I'm talking about? And so when I get exhausted, I don't it feels overwhelming, like this will never change. I can't see into the future when it will get better because of the time.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. This is kind of one of those aspects of the state dependent functioning that when we have a little bit more space and training, we dig into a little bit more. But you're exactly right. In that calm state, we are able to think really long into the future. And in the calm state, we can just sort of relax and sit back, and we have a broader sense of time. Thinking about what will I do next week or next month, or maybe how do I want to spend my time in the summer. But as the threat comes towards us, we're more focused on the here and now. And again, think about how that makes sense. When I'm trying to respond to a physical danger, I need to react to what's happening right now. And that lower part of my brain is trying to keep me alive, which means danger's coming at me. If I don't survive the next minute, it doesn't matter what happens to me 2 weeks from now, because I'm not going to be alive. So I'm paying attention to what's happening this minute, this second. But again, my brain doesn't know the difference between a real physical danger and an abstract threat that I am continuing to worry and focus on. And when I can only focus on this moment, that has a really kind of wearing down effect, because my sense of time is really only about making it through this moment right now, and that can really wear me down. Looks like there's been, go ahead, Debbie.
I was just going to say, in the chat box, we got a lot of people resonating with that difficulty falling asleep piece. It's not just, being able to take the naps. It's then when we finally get to lay down at the end of the day and we feel exhausted, and then our mind or our body won't let us fall asleep, and that kind of insomnia feeling, which makes the next day even harder, right? To then wake up and get going. So it's just kind of that cyclical feeling.
Yeah. So, sleep, this is something we could talk a lot about, and maybe should be something we could consider for future conversations, because there's a lot about sleep that's connected to rhythm. And again, if you've spent time with us, you know how much we love talking about rhythm, but the rhythm of your day, of waking and sleeping, and how that rhythm is tied to the rhythm of the sun being up and setting. And that's really ingrained in our physiology. However, it gets disrupted when we have artificial lights inside, when we have screens that we're looking at, and when our mind is connected with ideas and thinking and thinking and thinking, it's harder to get into that sleep routine. So, I put on that slide planning for more sleep and being planful about your sleep, if at all possible, because that insomnia and that difficulty falling asleep is really challenging. Recognizing that there are this would be a great chance to hear from folks about little tips and tricks that you're doing. There are really intentional things about turning off screens at least an hour before you plan to go to sleep. Really about 90 minutes or so is going to let your brain kind of settle down, because it's particularly connected to the light that's coming into your eyes there. So turning those screens off 60 to 90 minutes before you are hoping to fall asleep. Giving your mind something to focus on that is less threatening and less stressful. So maybe finding that book that you can read that's calming, listening to music that is going to be calming and not focused on those latest news headlines. So probably not catching the 11 o'clock news with all of the danger headlines that are coming across. I'm curious to hear from other folks though. Eve, I'm sure you've got some ideas. What other tips and things can we do to be planful to help ourselves fall asleep a little bit better?
Well, I have two things that I think can be really helpful. I noticed that in some of the content, it was talking about what I describe as racing thoughts, that worry about family, and you can't get away from those thoughts. And it's very typical when that happens, that's just really like a whirlpool that just continues to bring up all of the worry and negative thoughts. So one thing that you can think about is how do you stop those negative thoughts from happening? So I have a technique that is really helpful for me. And I have a picture of my now 29-year-old nephews who were toddlers at the time in ballet leotards and Barney slippers. They're making big time wrestling moves and they think that they're big time wrestlers. That makes me smile. It makes me really think about them, and can stop some of those racing thoughts. So that's a technique, and I'm sure other folks might have some that work for them. You know, there's a lot of breathing techniques that are incredibly helpful. If you can start to think about really paying attention to your breath during counts, that too can be a helpful strategy.
Thanks for those. Anyone else want to chime in on some strategies or things that are working for you? Sleep is one that it can be really, really unique and particular to each person. There are some universals around, you know, screen time and calming your thinking, but some of those particular techniques that are going to help you feel a little bit calmer is going to be unique to each person. I'm curious if other folks are finding things that are really working for them. Somebody in the chat box said one that I think is one, again, it probably works for a lot of folks, but not everybody. Having that exercise during the day, if you had a chance in the day to really get your heart rate going, to really push yourself and get some physical exercise, that will help you to sleep better at night. That may not be something that's universal for everyone, but it might be something that helps a few folks.
Yeah, Jesse, I was gonna say something like that too. Karen mentioned in the chat if she gets her sweaty workout in, and we're building a swing set right now, and so the days where we work really hard on the swing set and my body is as tired as my brain at the end of the day, I am sleeping better, which most days my brain is a lot more tired than my body at the end of the day, and that is sometimes challenging.
Nice. Thanks, Joanne. I appreciate that. Anyone else want to jump in a couple of things that are helpful for you? I think just the last recommendation that maybe I would give on this topic, and a few other folks have some really good things in the chat box area there. Scrolling back through some of those could be good, or read those here in a second. I think one of the main things that I would recommend about that is having a routine for that kind of getting ready for sleep time. It's again tied to that rhythm. So what are the things that I'm going to do that's going to really give my brain that signal and give my brain that message that it's time to start winding down and going to sleep? One of those things might be writing out some of those things that you're concerned and worried about, getting some of those thoughts out of your head and onto paper, but I've written them down and now I can put that aside and I'll address that in the morning. Somebody mentioned having some lavender in the aromatherapy in the diffuser. Maybe it's having a nice cup of tea, reading a book. So what is that routine and that rhythm that you're able to establish for yourself to prepare to go to sleep? This kind of ties back to Eve's previous comment that we regress to a lower developmental stage. And if you know from having young children, sleep routine, bedtime routine is key. You know, we're going to take a bath and then we're going to put on our PJs and then we're going to read a book and then we're going to sing a song and then we're going to go to sleep. And we do that same routine every night, which really triggers that young brain to know it's time to start winding down and falling asleep. Well, our brains might need some of that support, you know, or a word that we sometimes use is we might need some of that scaffolding now because we're kind of regressing and feeling more stressed. So we might need that same kind of scaffolding and support to help us get into that sleep routine. So identifying 3, maybe 4 things, they can be simple things, you know, glass of milk, write out my things I'm going to do tomorrow, read a chapter of my book, you know, listen to a short song or a short meditation, and then go to sleep. But having that routine will get to that, help us get to that point. Question in the chat box there. Sorry, Jane, real quick. It said, how long do you think it takes to get our body or mind to recognize the routine? It's going to be different for each person. The younger you are, you're going to adjust to that rhythm and that new routine pretty quickly. For an adult, I think, you're maybe, Eve, you could give some insight or thoughts on this. I'd say probably between 10 days and 2 weeks before it really gets to feel like a pattern and a new rhythm for you. It takes us a little bit more repetition as adults to recognize that new routine. I don't know, Eve, how would you answer that question? How long does it take for our body and our mind to recognize that new routine?
I think you're spot on. I think, though, the other thing that we know that makes things kind of settle in a little bit easier is if it's relaxing and somewhat fun. So if if it's things that you enjoy, right, then that routine is going to settle in a little bit faster than not.
Yeah, great insight there. When I even just think about, jet lag, if anyone's ever kind of traveled and you have a really significant time change, it really kind of takes you at least 3 or 4 days or more to really have your mind adjust to that time change. So it'll take several days. It's not going to happen just in one night. So Jane, go ahead. You had a comment?
I did. What you were describing is, I think you've said many times before that your brain doesn't always feel comfortable with novelty. And so the more routine and known what you do, your pattern before bed, the safer you feel, both children and adults. And so an extension of that might be for people to begin to focus as they want to go to bed on whatever is safe for them. So sometimes I think about the last time that I was in a setting where it felt really supported, where we had fun, Eve, as you say, and just kind of replay that comfortable, safe surrounding in my mind. Or, for those of you who have a partner, just a touch, just a hand touch on the other person's body gives safety. Or if you have a pet, just the touch of another warm body feels good and feels safe. That's why children like stuffed animals, because it mimics or replaces the touch of another human being. So whatever you can think of that represented the last time you felt really safe is what will calm your mind and allow you to reduce those fear and stress responses and really relax and get into a calm state. So it's different, I think, for everybody. If you can spend just a moment trying to figure out when the last time was that you felt really warm and safe and comfortable, and reduce the kinds of novelty and stress that result in stress, is helpful.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's different for everyone. That sense of safety is really key for sleep. I mean, because in sleep, you're really vulnerable. You've got to be safe because you're in your most vulnerable state. I think, the universals are going to be, have that familiar, consistent routine. Have a rhythm to it. So around the same time and doing around the same practices. But what the specifics are in there, that's going to be up to you and kind of what floats your boat and what seems something that's relaxing to you. Some folks love a hot cup of tea before bed. Other people never drink tea ever. Some people like that weighted blanket and that sense of feeling kind of snug and all wrapped up. Other people need a totally different physical space. So just find those 1 or 2 things that for you help you to feel safe, but then do that same thing. I'd give it at least 5 or 6 days to hopefully notice a bit of a benefit there. So sleep is a real challenge for sure. And I appreciate folks sharing some of their suggestions and tips about that.
I like that Joy's suggestion was doing math, which sounds more like a nightmare to me, but I mean, whatever floats your boat.
It's different for everybody, for sure.
Right.
So exhaustion is one change we're going to notice. I think this is another one people are going to really connect with. And this is something common we're hearing from everyone, this unhealthy eating that we're all noticing, boy, we're just reaching for the sweets and the chips and things so much more quickly and so much more often. Even just looking at this picture of these cookies stacked up here, I feel like I could eat that whole stack of cookies right now. So, it's really, this is something that when we are in that alarm state, when we're feeling that threat and that stress coming at us, we just are going to be reaching for the chocolate or the chips or the soda, and that is, our brain trying to feel some sort of a sense of reward. We just want to calm down that overactive stress that's going on in our brain. So the bag of chips, the bar of chocolate. So one suggestion for this, I think we could, talk about the problem for a long time. We all can relate to this one. But what are some things that are helping us? A real key tip in this area is that crunchy foods provide that same reward as snacking on the chips or the chocolate. Crunchy foods give that same reward to the brain, at least a little bit. I know carrots can never replace chocolate chip cookies, and celery is not quite the same as Pringles. But in the same way, that we want to get that, it's really kind of about intensity. When you're in this state of stress and alarm, it's about intensity. So if I can get that crunchy food, if I can bite into an apple, if I can snap that carrot or that celery, it's going to give us that sense of reward that our brain is looking for as a way to, in some way, kind of balance out those unhealthy eating habits there. I know it's probably not what people would love to hear. It'd be better if I could somehow come up with some delicious but healthy chocolate chip cookies that we could all just eat. But unfortunately, going for those crunchy foods is going to be the best thing to kind of balance that out.
So, Jesse, the thing is, your body, because you're in an alarm state, your body's kind of getting you prepared for if you have to fight or flight, right? And so it's kind of filling you up with things that have that fatty, salty, crunchy. Another thought is to replace some of that with some protein, some yogurt, some things that, because your body is craving, wanting to be safe. The other thing we know that's really rewarding when you are in that state is relationships. So, if you're finding yourself reaching for the chips, maybe going for a walk with someone would be just as rewarding, well, maybe, as the chips. You know what? So my dog now, he can be dead asleep and he'll hear a chip bag open and he is right in front of me, like going, okay, what are we having now?
Any other folks want to chime in on this one of ways? I think, again, that unhealthy eating, we're all feeling this. It's similar in that realm. You're exactly right, Eve. Connecting with relationships, and it's about that intensity, like you say, getting ready for that fight or flight. So, maybe getting that real kind of tight bear hug, or going for a brisk walk with somebody, an upbeat walk. Our body is craving that intensity when we're in that stressful alarm state. This is another one that, that stress is going to impact how we're behaving. And when we have those moments of like, why am I acting like this? I just had this, incredible emotional outburst. And that emotional outburst could be you're teary-eyed, you're just sort of, you're crying over something that you normally, why am I getting so emotional about this? Or it could be an outburst of anger and frustration. And again, that is when we are lower down in the brain, we're less rational. We just really don't have that full capacity to think and respond to a situation. So we take it more personally. We feel more emotional, where all of our feelings are heightened in that moment because we're in that high relational state and we're in that alarm state, and we're going to just feel it a lot more. I think the best recommendation to recognize this is that we all need a bit of self-compassion during this time, that we all need to work to, as much as possible, be intentional around giving ourselves the same kindness that we would offer to a friend or that we would offer to a family member. I know for myself, it's so easy for me to go the extra mile of kindness and forgiveness for somebody else. But if I slip up and make a mistake, if I have a moment of frustration where I snap or shout, I think, why am I acting like this? I should be able to keep it together. Well, the stress is severe and the stress is prolonged. And so I'm going to have emotional outbursts. That's going to happen. And I have to give myself that same kind of kindness, that same self-compassion that I would offer to somebody else. Anyone want to chime in on thoughts about, the challenges of these emotional outbursts, or how to, even if anyone has insight of ways to practice that self-compassion? It's kind of one of those phrases that's easy to say but can be hard to do. Folks can feel free to jump in at any time if you want to offer something in the chat box or chime in. I'll just put a couple more examples here that people might be experiencing, and then we can talk generally about stuff. Another probably common behavior that you're noticing, you're kind of, what is going on, is this foggy thinking that I can't quite formulate the words. I can't quite, I'm forgetting things. It just, things don't seem to be clear in my mind. And this one is really all about not having access to your cortex. It's really all about that you're using so much brain energy to respond to that sense of threat, that clear thinking, rational thinking, words just aren't quite fitting together, maybe feeling a little more forgetful, that fogginess is there. So, okay, what do we do about that? We're all feeling that foggy thinking. What could we do? I think a big part can be decreasing those notifications and those interruptions. Notifications, interruptions, especially when we're working from home, responding to emails and texts and notifications. Every single one of those little chimes and dings and headlines that come across the screen, our brain has to process that and has to quickly make a decision. Is this a threat? Do I need to respond to this? How am I going to react? And every time we have to make that response, it uses up more brain energy. It uses up more calories, uses more of that resources that we have, and it's just going to wear us down, and we're going to feel more foggy. So if we can turn some of those notifications off, help ourselves to be in a more safe space. And similarly, we just go back to some of those tried and true things. I need to make a list. I need to have some reminders for myself. I need to write down what are the things that I need to do. Excuse me. I try to remember everything I need to get from the store when I run out, but I'm going to forget if I don't write it down. And then those quick movement breaks are going to activate that rhythm and that movement again. That's going to help that lower part of the brain feel more regulated and give us more access to our cortex. So those are just a few quick things about how to kind of address that foggy thinking. Probably another big part of it is, again, all of these sort of tie together, having some self-compassion. When you're just like at the end of the day going, okay, I'm running on empty. I have no more words. I have no more thoughts. Practice that self-compassion and say, hey, I've run out, this is the end. I can't think much more clearly anymore, and recognize this is where you've kind of hit your limit. So let me just share one other quick example of where we might see that impact of that stressful, the threats and the stress that we're feeling is something that is known as decision fatigue, which is, again, when we have to make a lot of decisions again and again and again, that uses a lot of brain power. And right now, especially for those of us who may be challenged to be making decisions regarding work or making difficult decisions for clients or families that we're working with. There's really no good answer to this. How do we respond in a pandemic? There are a lot of variables and challenges in that situation. There's no easy answer. And so I have to use a lot of brain power to make that decision. And when I have to do that again and again and again, I really get kind of tired in that decision making role. And so we might find that I just am more automatic in my thinking. I'm going to do the thing that comes quickest and easiest. Yes or no? My thinking is less complex because, again, I'm not in that cortex. So this is where, I might find myself, buying something I don't really need, or making a quick decision at work that actually maybe isn't in the best interest for people that I'm working with. So a couple of suggestions about this could be kind of know your zone. Know when are you in that best state? When is it likely that you might be closer to that calm state? For some of us, it's first thing in the morning. That's my, most optimal zone. When I wake up early in the morning, kids are still asleep, and I can focus in and really have the most access to my cortex. For other people, they've got to warm up a little bit more in the day, and it might be in the afternoon or even later at night. But knowing kind of when you're in that optimal zone and you can be closest to that calm state. And then similarly, just knowing, hey, don't make big decisions when you're stressed. It's okay to say, let me revisit this one a little bit later when I have a bit more access to my cortex and kind of know where I'm at. So I'm just going to pause there again. Those are some of the predictable, sort of typical responses to stress that we're going to feel when we're in that heightened alarm or alert state. What other folks what are folks seeing, or what other topics do we want to kind of bring into the conversation today? Appreciate all the things that people are contributing in the chat area there. Thank you for that. Any questions or even kind of behaviors or things that people are noticing that maybe we didn't touch on? Again, this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list. We're all going through this in our own kind of unique experience. So are there things that people are feeling or experiencing that maybe we didn't touch on? Yeah, Joanna, you kind of mentioned how quickly you kind of shift, seem like you're fine, and then all of a sudden noticing that exhaustion or huge decision fatigue. I think other folks are probably feeling that as well. Again, we kind of talk about that baseline and not realizing that that baseline is sort of shifting and how quickly it is to kind of jump to that sense. Joanne, that's an interesting question. What will it look like for our brains or our behavior as we begin to return to a new normal? Do you want to take that one, Eve? What will it look like for our brains and for our behavior as we begin to return to a new normal?
So I think we're going to be in this for a while, to be honest with you, because the new normal is still going to have a lot of stress and anxiety, because the virus will still be here. Until we have a vaccine, or until we can test everybody instantly, we are still going to have a lot of anxiety about being around people, and we're going to have to be really cautious and aware. So I don't know, the new normal is still going to have a lot of anxiety and a lot of moving in and out of an alarm state. So I think the one thing that can potentially help is it might be easier to get into routines that are predictable. That can be really helpful. But yeah, I don't know that the new normal means that this stuff will automatically go away, because it just creates some new anxieties, because you're going to be around people more frequently, and there's still going to be some stress about that. One thing that I do want to point out is that there's one behavior that sometimes I would just mention, especially if it's your children, is that sometimes they just kind of zone out, and they're what we would call a little dissociative, in the sense that they're really not reacting as we would think they would. They're really flat. They're really kind of not completely engaging. And so really thinking about ways that you can help pull them into the here and now and with you is helpful. That can be kind of some breaks that include maybe cinnamon kinds of candy, getting them to kind of use not a stress ball, but something that has texture and crinkly and noisy to it. That can pull someone back into the here and now too. So, I just want to mention that we often think of behavioral outbursts, and those are really identifiable and noticeable, but don't forget that other one that is kind of that shutting down and being zoned.
Yeah, the puzzles are a great one for that one. Just kind of doing a simple puzzle that you can sort of connect those pieces. That kind of helps you feel like you got something done too. Every time I connect a piece on the puzzle, I feel like I achieved something and solved a little piece right there. So
just I wanted to mention that we've talked about as we move forward, and we kind of are doing these on a regular basis, that we really have also talked about what the reentry will look like, because it is going to create some new dynamics. So again, the new normal won't necessarily make all of this go away.
Agreed. Yeah. This is going to be a challenge for us for a long time, and it might be a good time right now to just say that as an agency for Family and Children First Council, our goal and our mission is to support all of our partners in Central Ohio and really around the state in doing this difficult work. So our intent is to continue these conversations. To that end, a couple of things that we'll just sort of share and make sure people see. There was a question about how to access the previous community conversations. And so our YouTube channel, if you were to search Franklin County Family and Children First Council, all of our previous conversations are on there, and they include this same format of just kind of talking through some of that information. If you did not receive those previous messages, you can put your email in the chat box there, and Debbie or myself will make sure that we get you on that list, and we can send those previous resources to you. I really also just kind of want to take a second to let folks know that coming up next week, we are looking forward to having a conversation around how this pandemic is impacting us each differently. We say that we are all in this together, and that is true, but the experience is different for each of us. That for many of us who have challenges of adverse experiences in our past, of trauma history, of health issues from our past, current health issues, current challenges of resources, or even what it might mean for folks who are essential workers and who are working on the front lines right now. And that experience is different for each of us. This is a conversation that we feel like is really important, and we are hoping to have some more community participation, and looking forward to offering this to recognize that even though we are all in this together, we each have a different role and a different experience, and giving voice and giving the opportunity for people to share what that looks like. You can register for that conversation next week if you put in that code there, and we can post that in the chat box as well, that tinyurl.com/FCFC0512, as in May 12th, because it'll be Tuesday, May 12th, here at the same time at 10 a.m. And then you'll be sure to get the email update that will give you the link to the Zoom meeting for that. So we appreciate everyone's participation today. My email is there on the screen as well. And you're welcome to stay after past the 11 o'clock time here. We'll close our time up together, but you're welcome to stay after, ask any questions or request any resources there in the chat box area, and we'll be sure to get that to you. But again, we're committed to helping and supporting the agencies and the workers in our community. And we appreciate all of you so much and all of the hard work that you are doing. So we look forward to continuing to meet together in this setting. And if you have any requests for more information or trainings, feel free to reach out.
The other thing that we always ask for at the end of these is if you have any ideas, suggestions, things that you want to hear more about, things that we touched on that maybe you want deeper dives on, or continued conversations around that. I know some of you put that in the SurveyMonkey when you're signing up, but if you would like to put that in there or private message that via the chat if you don't want to post it to everyone, we're happy to take all of those suggestions and feedback as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks for your support today. Thanks, Eve, for being my conversation partner here. As always, thank you to Jane, our agency director, and all of our team who's working with us. So have a good day and a good week, everyone. Stay safe, and please stay in touch. Let us know if there's anything we can be doing, addressing in these conversations, or to continue to partner with you in this work.